So I study the French Revolution, and I have become obsessed with this man called David. He's French, so it's probably like David or something, but I'm calling him David because his name is David. It's his surname. His first name is like Louis something. They're all called Louis. Anyway, David. He's a good guy. He's a guy you should be interested in. I am like shocked that he's not more talked about because the unique thing about David, which I'm not sure if you know anything about the revolution, but the unique thing about David is that he lived through all of it. That was not an easy thing to do, especially if you were as prominent as David was, because David was heavily involved. He literally voted for the king to be executed. Most of those people were executed themselves. The thing about the French Revolution was that it was very good of disposing anybody involved in it. And somehow, like a cockroach, David survived. So today you're going to learn about David, because David's amazing. He's also an absolute diva. Like he got angry at many things. He's a fun guy, so let me tell you about David. So the first chapter of David's life is what I'm going to call the Diva years, because this was his founding. For context, David is a painter. No thanks! My mother's inviting me to go swimming. I'd rather talk to you about David. So, he's a painter. He painted a lot of the revolution. He was also a politician, but that came later. His diva years came first. I'd say like his villain origin story is that his father died in a duel, and his mother made him move in with two of his uncles who were architects, and David was not very good at school. Or like, I don't know, I don't think he was particularly challenged. I think he was just a bit challenging in that he didn't want to do any school. He just drew the whole time, he doodled. But he was very good at doodling, so that served him well. So his architect uncles were like, David, we want you to be an architect. David refused. David became a painter. They were kind of annoyed, but they got over it. Right, so when he went to art school, David was known by his fellow students to be just like a difficult person. Like, they didn't much like him. He wasn't particularly popular, which, like, go on, me too. I get you, David. But he was known to be a diva. They didn't have that word at the time, but he was a diva. They were all like, he's difficult to get along with. He goes around making trouble, basically. His most diva event that I can find is that there was this thing in the art school that he was in called the Prix de Rome, or the Prize of Rome. It was basically like a scholarship kind of thing, where if you won this prize, you would submit your finest artwork, and if you won this prize, you would be sent to Rome to go and study with the classical artists in Rome. You get to do some tours of Rome, get to do all the fancy Rome things, and David just he was fixated on winning this prize. I don't know why. I don't know, like, I guess it was just really prestigious. He really liked the sort of classical style. It was becoming super fashionable at the time because David was a neoclassical painter, and neoclassical, that was becoming the style. So it made sense. He really wanted to go to Rome. He was a rich guy. I personally feel like he could have just gone to Rome, but no, he wanted the prestige of this award, and I would say he felt quite entitled to it. So he submitted his first thing. He tried the first time, he didn't get in, he was sad. He submitted the second time, so the second year he applied to the Prix de Rome again. He didn't get it, so he went on hunger strike because he thought that this is an outrage, I deserve to have won this award. So the university faculty went to him and they were like, David, you are a good painter, we all know you just didn't win. You should keep going. And he was like, oh, they love me. So he didn't he stopped his hunger strike. So then he submitted the third year. He failed again. David is despairing. He submitted the fourth year. He finally wins the Prix de Rome, and he goes to Rome and he does all of the fancy Roman stuff. But he went on hunger strike because he didn't win a prize. Diva. This is when I would say that David entered his revolutionary era. So he made a painting called The Death of Socrates. Ignore me at this point when I'm talking about the death of Socrates. What I actually mean is a painting called The Oath of Horatii. I got confused. And I'm going to assume you know nothing about the revolution. There was a guy called Rousseau at the time. You might know him as the man was born free, but everywhere he is in chains guy. He was that man. I've probably got that quote wrong, but that was what he was on about. And he came up with a thing called the social contract, which was the general will. Basically, he came up with the crazy idea. It's not exactly democracy, it's just the idea that the general will is the idea that most people should agree with the decisions of government. So, he's not saying that there should be voting or anything, he's just saying that, the king should do things that the people wants the king to do. That was pretty crazy at the time. So in this Death of Socrates painting, David, he basically endorses this idea. So look, he's being an early revolutionary. There are many stages to the revolution, and the mad thing about David is that he supports all of them and survives, which is crazy because most people who were prominent in any one of these stages were killed by the people of the next stage for not being revolutionary enough or for being too revolutionary. And David just gets away with it. So he paints this painting basically endorsing the general will, which was dangerous because he associated himself with the people of the first stage. So it's the liberal nobles, it's the fancy men with all of their fancy ideas. They don't really want any crazy Marxist revolution, they just think, I would rather like for the tax system to be reformed, because that would make me wealthier. Like, the early French Revolution was nothing to do with getting rid of the king, it was nothing to do with, for many people it was nothing to do with improving the, wealth of the average person. It was a lot of liberal nobles who wanted more political power, and they liked these sort of abstract ideas of democracy. And David associated himself with that. Oh, this painting is also notable because it kind of shows how quite a lot of sexism came out of the French Revolution. In this one, he depicts basically a man, and sort of he's like teaming up with some other men, and then there are a bunch of women to the side, and they're just sort of sitting there all small and hunched over, showing how the idea of the general will was not something that included women. France basically at the time, or what was emerging, was the idea of an active citizen. So an active citizen is a man of 25 years, I think, who basically pays a lot of tax. So basically, rich men should have a voice in government. That's what this idea is. The women are very much sidelined in the picture, like they're not part of the general will. But that's risky for David because that's an early conservative revolutionary idea that he's attached himself to when we know that the revolution's about to get a lot more radical. And David, that's going to look outdated in a few years' time. So how are you going to get away with this? He just does. He squirms his way out of it, like a little squirmy worm. It was pretty metaphorical. Honestly, if I looked at that painting today, I'm sure people at the time would have understood it. But if I looked at it, I wouldn't go, wow, that's a reference to Rousseau's The General Will. I would go, that's like a man holding 3 swords out to 3 men while 3 women look. Anyway. Irrelevant. Okay, at this point in time, now I'm talking about the Death of Socrates. Critics called this painting in every way perfect. It was compared to Michelangelo's The Sistine Chapel. Like, to be fair to David, he is a very good painter. Like, he knew what he was on about. It did not receive royal endorsement. David was angry. He knows he's good. Everybody knows he's good. And for some reason he keeps failing. He just misses the mark of all of these, like, really important awards. And I feel like this rage fuels him, to be honest. Maybe we can take David as an inspirational story in that regard. And you know what? I feel like not quite being at the top enabled him to keep going. You don't want to peak too early, and if you peak too early in the French Revolution, my god, you're dead. Okay, so next up on David's list of paintings, he did a painting of a man called Lavoisier, notable Jacobin. And at this time, Louis XVI, who was the King of France during the Revolution, was having a little bit of a clampdown on revolutionary ideas, which honestly came too late. Either you should have been an absolute monarch at the beginning, and you probably would have been okay, or you should have been a benign despot, and then people would have been like, okay, we can work with this king, we can have constitutional monarchy. But what he did instead was to be super liberal at the beginning, for example, bringing back the parliaments, which allowed people to have, like, free-thinking ideas, and then he was like, oh my god, I can't handle that, and he closed them all, like, he tried to close them all down, and then he tried to suppress it, but it was too late. So that's my beef with Louis XVI. I know, like, he didn't know it was going to happen, but I blame him for much of the revolution. In this era, he was suppressing the press a little bit. So Louis did this painting of a notable Jacobin, and it gets banned. So they go, yeah, we're not having propaganda agitating the people. We don't want people glorifying the people from the Jacobin Club, because that'll reduce the influence of the king. But then the people here, the newspapers get on board with this, and they hear, oh my gosh, they've suppressed this painting. So this is an example of David, actively continuing the revolution, because his work is used to, basically it's a mini uprising. People say, hey, we want to see this painting. Why are you suppressing it? I want to look at that painting. How dare you? And then they have to capitulate, and they let people see the painting. Little smidgen of revolution. Now I'm going to talk about, this is like David's extra revolutionary era, but also probably David's first blunder, but it's also kind of what launched him. The tennis court oath. Absolutely stunning piece of the revolution. Little story of the tennis court oath, really, really quick summary, is that there's a gang called the National Assembly. These are like politicians who are, in the midst of the early revolution, they're getting politics going because there were basically no politics in France. The king had like absolute monarchy. The National Assembly, and they want to have a meeting, and meetings are usually held in the Palace of Versailles, like alongside the king, because the monarchy was the revolution early on was not anti-monarchy. They were doing it like next to the king. So they want to have this meeting, and it's unclear whether the king did it on purpose or whether he was just incompetent, but they get locked out of the Palace of Versailles. Oh no. So they're kind of, angry. So then they find a tennis court, but it's like an indoor tennis court, and it's also a 1700s tennis court, so it's not really what we would recognize as a tennis court. They find a building called a tennis court, and they swear the tennis court oath. And the tennis court oath is basically, we will not separate until we get constitutional monarchy. And what that means is like making the king sign a document which limits his powers a bit and establishes how the country's going to run. Because previously France's constitution was just whatever the king says goes. That's pretty revolutionary. But it's also pretty early revolutionary, because they want an agreement with the king. They don't want to get rid of the king. Anyway, David, he does a painting of the tennis court oath. It's probably the most famous painting of the tennis court oath. The reason why I got interested in David, because he's painting all of these paintings in my textbook. Like, if you look throughout, like, David, oh, it's David again. Because this man doesn't die. So he paints the tennis court oath, but what he does wrong is that he glorifies the tennis court oath. Oh no, because, as I've just said, the tennis court oath is an early revolutionary thing. People are saying, we like the king. It's kind of like their Magna Carta. Like, we want him to sign a few rules with us. But they want to keep the king there. But obviously that idea becomes rapidly outdated as the revolution becomes more radical. And people, the heroes in the tennis court oath, a lot of them become basically villains in the next stage, or like anti-revolutionary or like not revolutionary enough. So David's endorsement of the tennis court oath glorifying these people has him in a spot of bother once these people become conservative fiends. David's solution to this problem is just to not finish the painting. But it doesn't matter because it was like good enough by that point. Like, you see this painting, no one ever writes underneath David's unfinished painting of the tennis court oath because it looks finished. I'm sure he was gonna like glam it up a bit, but it looks nice. He wriggles out of that one because he's like, yeah, okay, look, it's not done. I just won't finish it, okay? Yeah? And then he gets away with it. But what David learns from this incident is that he shouldn't be making political statements, obviously, with his work. So from then on, whenever he wants to endorse something, he does it sneakily. He uses symbols, so he can have plausible deniability. A lot of pictures of historical events. Obviously, your interpretation of that event as it's happening in the French Revolution is dangerous. Like, it's gonna change. Okay, I will describe this next era as David's Terror era. And if you know the French Revolution, you know the Terror is the period in which basically the French Revolution goes crazy. They start killing everybody. And it's also like a common misconception of the French Revolution that it was a big execution of the nobles and the fancy people. The Terror mostly killed normal people. It was basically a point in time where there was mass paranoia and hysteria and everybody was accusing everybody. If you know like about witch hunts and things, it's basically you say, ooh, I think my neighbour next door, I think he's against the revolution, quickly kill him. And then he would be killed without trial or defense. And they were killing them in crazy ways as well, like they were tying them up naked and then shooting holes in boats to like sink these people into lakes. There were lots of massacres. They like emptied the prisons, and the way in which they emptied the prisons was by killing everybody in the prisons. You could be arrested on suspicion that you might commit a crime in the future, not that you had committed a crime. That's what the Terror is anyway. So this is David's Terror era, which again, how on earth do you survive the Terror era? Basically, everybody involved in the Terror was killed, either during the Terror or after the Terror, when the people in the Terror were killed by the people who said that the Terror was bad. Maybe I'm just going insane. My A-level is like in a few weeks' time. I should not be talking to you. I should be revising for that, but like, David lived for a long time. He's pretty good revision. David paints what is called his masterpiece. David paints his masterpiece. He paints Marat in the bath. And Marat in the bath is an iconic moment. Marat, he was a prominent revolutionary man, and Marat gets stabbed in the bath by a prostitute. The reason why Marat was in a bath was because after the Champ de Mars massacre, which was basically the king massacring a bunch of people who wanted to sign a petition to say that the king should like step down. After the Champ de Mars massacre, the king does a lot of suppression of the press, he does a lot of suppression of political people, arresting people, and Marat was one of the people involved who was probably going to be arrested. So Marat flees to the sewers. And in the sewers, Marat gets a horrible skin condition that makes him itchy all the time. So then Marat's solution to this skin condition, because it was like the 1700s and they didn't have any nice ointments, is to spend almost all of his time in the bath. So he would go in the bath to like soothe his itchy skin. And he had a desk in his bath in which he would write letters. And because it was during the Terror, most of his writing was lists of people who should be executed. Imagine being one of the people who got executed by a man writing down their name, like naked in a bath. Anyhow, so Marat gets stabbed. Marat was a good friend of David. The other thing here is that David was friends with Robespierre and Marat, who are both infamous members of the Terror. Infamous. And he does not get executed like everybody else. How? Why? David paints his death. It's a very nice picture. It's a good picture. Like Marat sort of sitting there like, oh, looking all dead and sad. It's supposed to have some kind of link to Christ, which is risky, David, because you're again glorifying people who were involved in the Terror, but David's invincible. Oh yeah, so then David goes through like a spree of organising people's funerals, because obviously loads of people were getting killed during the Terror. Decided to display Marat's body in like an open environment with his like wound, because he got like stabbed about here, sort of like exposed, and his hand was stretched out holding a pen to symbolise that he died like writing the foundations of the French Revolution. Well, you could see how his art was coming into his propaganda, was coming into his arrangement of a corpse. So because he was like an edgy little man during the revolution, he has this excellent quote where he's like, he could hear the people's voices in his head saying, "David, take up your brushes, avenge Marat." It's a very nice painting. It's quite spooky looking. I like the colours. It's my high-level art critique. It's got like a nice black background. It's quite emo. Wake me up when September. Right, now we come to the end of the Terror. The guy who was leading the Terror, Robespierre. So Robespierre's attitude was, if there's any hint that you're not going to continue the momentum of the revolution, then you should be killed. And this is a sacrifice that is worthwhile for continuing revolutionary France, which is again why it's so surprising David was able to survive, because he had endorsed the conservative early revolution in his paintings, which were like public records, and yet he wasn't getting killed alongside people who had done absolutely nothing wrong. I think it's just because he had so many powerful connections and he was clearly quite charming that he was able to survive. Obviously, people got tired of this after a while because they basically thought there's no longer a necessity for this level of bloodshed. Robespierre is executed. The way that David escapes this is that he's ill on the day when they round up Robespierre and his followers. So he just has like stomach bug. It's not certain that he has stomach bug. It kind of implies that he might have poisoned himself because he was gonna like do that in solidarity with Robespierre. But basically he's ill on that day, so he's not present, so they don't get him. And then the second thing here is that they do arrest him, because obviously they're gonna arrest him. They don't arrest him with everybody else. Like, if he was arrested with all of those people, he would have been instantly executed with all of those people, because it was just a mass arrest and execution situation. But he gets arrested afterwards. He gets put in jail twice. In revolutionary France, when you have connections to Robespierre, like you are a personal friend of Robespierre, being put in prison twice is a death sentence to anybody, but not David, for some reason. So David gets away with it again. He eventually gets out of prison because his wife, let me find her name because I'm not a sexist, Margaret Charlotte Pecou. So his wife, Margaret Charlotte Pecou, gets him out of prison. She wasn't his wife at the time, I don't think. They got divorced like midway through the revolution. Basically, you know when he signed that he wanted the king to get executed, Margaret Charlotte was like, "Excuse me? I liked the king. Don't do that. I'm divorcing you." Icon. It's quite difficult for women to get divorced in that era. And she divorced him over getting the king executed, which was dangerous. And she survived, despite, liking the king. Anyway, he remarried her. He was like, "I've loved you all this time." She forgave him for killing the king of France. Okay, so now we are moving on to David's Napoleonic era. How do you survive this, David? The Napoleonic era is not as killy as the French Revolution, especially during the Terror, but key piece of context here. Napoleon's wife, Josephine, her husband, she had like quite a few husbands. One of her previous husbands, David, had like personally written the death warrant thingy for. So he had ordered the death of one of her previous husbands during the terror. I think that after the revolution, when having killed loads of people became quite unfashionable again, that would be like held against him, since the wife of the man in charge of France had one of her previous husbands killed by David. You'd think that wouldn't be good for him, but no, he's fine. David's wife tells him about something called the rape of the Sabine woman, and David paints this. And Napoleon sees this and he's like, I like that. I like that stylistically. So then David becomes one of Napoleon's little painter men, and that I guess means that Josephine doesn't have much of an input on David should be punished for killing her ex-husband. Personally, if you killed my husband during the terror, I would be angry with you after the terror. No, he gets away with it because he's David. So he ends his career as one of Napoleon's painters. He famously paints, is it Napoleon at the St. Bernard Pass? Let me just check. It's like this amazing picture of Napoleon on a horse. He looks very camp. Napoleon at the St. Bernard Pass. David paints this picture of Napoleon on a horse. Like, nay. Napoleon's quite good at using propaganda to establish himself as this military genius, despite him perchance using quite a lot of tactics that already existed and not being as consistently successful as he suggests. But Napoleon's a very good propagandist, and he uses people like David to create that image. Napoleonic era ends at the end of the apocalypse of the French Revolution. There's taxes, there's cockroaches, and there's David. He was part of the Committee of General Security. They were like the people who directed the terror, so they organized the mass killings. Most of those people were killed. He was part of that, and just got away with it. And this has nothing to do with David, but I think I will finish this little David frenzy with the best picture ever painted of Napoleon and Tsar Alexander II. Is it the second? I don't know. Which is this image. I'll just let you appreciate that for a second. It's amazing. This was after the Tilnitz Treaty. Basically, Napoleon, he really liked Tsar Alexander II. Well, Tsar Alexander II wasn't doing what Napoleon wanted him to do with the Continental Blockade. Like, he was trading with Britain. Disgusting. And then Napoleon was like, hey, that's not on. I'm going to invade you. And then afterwards they do a treaty. But this treaty is really favourable to Russia compared to some of Napoleon's other treaties, because his tactic was that he would invade you, then he would give you a treaty on Napoleon's terms, because you're now an invaded country. He invaded Russia, won, and then gave this treaty basically on Russia's terms, because he really, really liked Russia. Nobody knows why, but I'm just gonna leave you with this picture.